The galaxy's most advanced civilizations voted to quarantine humanity, not because we were weak, but because our refusal to surrender terrified them more than any weapon they'd ever faced. The vast amphitheater of the Galactic Council buzzed, with the chittering, growling, and electronic harmonics of 1,000 different species. Holographic displays flickered above each delegation, translating the cacophony into a semblance of order. At the center of it all, Chancellor Vexithara of the Zephyrian Collective raised her crystalline appendages for silence. Distinguished beings of the galaxy, her voice resonated through the translation matrices. We gather today to address Resolution 44471X, the permanent exclusion of the species known as humans from all Galactic Council territories and activities. A ripple of what could only be described as amusement passed through the assembly. The Korthani delegation's mandibles clicked in their equivalent of laughter, while the gaseous nebuloids pulsed with colors indicating mirth. Even the stoic Titanforge Collective's representatives allowed their optical sensors to dim in what their species considered humor. Ambassador Zektar of the warrior caste Hegemony unfolded his massive frame from his seat. Standing nearly 4 meters tall, his scarred carapace gleamed under the chamber's lights. "Honored Chancellor," his voice boomed, requiring no translation device. "Surely we jest. These humans are barely past their planetary infancy. Their fastest vessels require decades to traverse distances our children cover in mere cycles. What possible threat could such primitive creatures pose?" The chamber erupted in sounds of agreement. The crystalline shard singers chimed melodiously, their song translating to, "They have not even mastered basic energy manipulation beyond crude fusion." The cybernetic nexus minds transmitted directly. "Analysis indicates their technology is approximately 2.3 centuries behind standard galactic baseline." Chancellor Vexithara waited for the noise to subside, her expression unreadable behind her species' natural facial plates. "The data would seem to support your assessment, Ambassador Zektar. However, we have received concerning reports from our monitoring stations." "Concerning?" Ambassador Felthok of the Trade Federation's multiple eye stalks swiveled toward the AU, Chancellor. "Surely you don't mean their quaint little wars, their primitive chemical propulsion, their inability to even establish permanent colonies beyond their home system's third planet?" The laughter grew louder. The slug-like gastropod collective oozed with what their physiology allowed for humor, while the machine intelligence of the sovereign AI network processed the situation with what could only be described as digital amusement. "Their weapons are laughably crude," continued Zektar, warming to his topic. "Kinetic projectiles, chemical explosives. They still rely on organic soldiers instead of proper battle synthetics. A single hegemony dreadnought could pacify their entire world within a solar rotation." "Indeed," chimed in Ambassador Silthera, from the psionic dominion, her telepathic emanations carrying undertones of condescension to all present. "Our preliminary scans indicate their mental defenses are practically non-existent. A novice thought-weaver could dominate their entire command structure within moments." Chancellor Vexithara's appendages dimmed slightly, a sign of growing irritation among her people. "Distinguished ambassadors, if I may direct your attention to archive entry 7749 Omega." The chamber's central hologram shimmered and resolved into a star system map. A small blue-green planet orbited a yellow star, with various markers indicating human settlements and installations. "This is the Sol system approximately 4.7 cycles ago," Vexthara continued. "Our deep space monitoring array captured these images during what the humans termed their third global conflict." The display shifted to show grainy footage of human cities under bombardment. Primitive aircraft dropped crude explosives while ground forces advanced with what appeared to be barely adequate equipment. "As you can see," laughed Ambassador Krelthon of the Void Hunters, his shark-like features twisted in amusement. "They cannot even achieve planetary unity. They wage war upon themselves with technology our ancestors abandoned millennia ago." But Vexithara was not finished. Observer drones were positioned to record what our analysts expected to be a standard primitive conflict resolution. Instead, they captured this. The hologram zoomed in on a particular engagement. Human soldiers, vastly outnumbered and outgunned, had been surrounded in what appeared to be a strategically hopeless position. Their equipment was damaged, their supplies depleted, and reinforcements were days away. Standard military doctrine suggests immediate surrender or negotiated withdrawal, noted the Nexus Mines representative. Probability of survival through continued engagement, 0.003%. Indeed, Vexithara agreed. However, the humans chose differently. The footage played. The surrounded humans, rather than surrendering, began to fight with an intensity that caused several ambassadors to shift uncomfortably in their seats. They used broken equipment as weapons, turned debris into fortifications, and when their ammunition ran low, they charged with nothing but sharpened metal. Curious, muttered Ambassador Thekmar of the Scholarly Conclave. Inefficient but curious. The engagement lasted 72 of their hours. Vexithara continued as the images played. By all calculations, they should have been eliminated within the first 6. Instead, they held their position until reinforcements arrived. Admirable tenacity for primitives, Zektar grudgingly admitted, but hardly grounds for exclusion from galactic society. If anything, such warrior spirit might prove useful under proper guidance. The chamber murmured agreement. Several species had built their reputations on similar displays of martial prowess, though admittedly with far superior technology. This was merely the first recorded incident, Vexthara said quietly. There have been others. The hologram shifted again. Now, showing various human conflicts across their history. Each scene displayed the same disturbing pattern, humans refusing to yield even when faced with overwhelming odds, finding ways to continue fighting with whatever materials were at hand, and demonstrating a disturbing tendency to view certain death as merely another tactical consideration. In each instance, Vexithera explained, human forces have displayed a consistent pattern of behavior that our xenopsychologists find troubling. Ambassador Quilneth of the Pacifist Alliance's bioluminescent patches flickered nervously. Surely, you exaggerate, Chancellor. All species display survival instincts. What makes these humans so different? Allow me to present Archive Entry 8832 Zeta, Vexithara replied, her appendages now glowing with what her species displayed when deeply concerned. The new footage showed a human installation under siege. The defenders were clearly outmatched, their position untenable, their escape routes cut off. Standard protocol for any civilized species would be immediate surrender to preserve life. Instead, the humans began dismantling their own base. Analysis indicates they are destroying their own strategic assets, observed the Nexus Mines with electronic confusion. This serves no tactical purpose. The attacking force could have utilized these resources. Unless, Vexithara said grimly, denying those resources to the enemy is considered more important than survival. The footage continued. The humans systematically destroyed everything of value, then rigged their entire facility with explosives. When the enemy finally breached their defenses, the humans detonated their own base, taking themselves and a significant portion of the attacking force with them. Silence fell over the chamber. Even the constantly chittering insectoid swarms went quiet. Perhaps Ambassador Yelthari of the Merchant Guild spoke hesitantly. This was an isolated incident? A malfunction in their command structure? Archive Entry 9901 Alpha, Vexthara, announced. The new scene showed human naval vessels in what their species called space. Primitive fusion-powered craft engaged in combat with what appeared to be a superior force. When several human vessels were crippled and about to be boarded, their crews made a choice that caused several ambassadors to physically recoil. The damaged ships accelerated directly toward the enemy vessels, using themselves as kinetic weapons. The resulting impacts destroyed both attacker and defender, but denied the enemy any prizes or prisoners. Fascinating, whispered Ambassador Drakthul of the Death Cult sect, his species being among the few that found the display impressive rather than horrifying. They embrace oblivion with such enthusiasm. This brings us to Archive Entry 047 Omega, Vexithara continued, her appendages now pulsing with the deep crimson that indicated genuine alarm among her people. What our analysts have termed the Thermopylae incident The holographic display shimmered and resolved into an ancient battlefield. The image quality was different, older, grainier, but unmistakably authentic. A narrow pass between mountain cliffs, where a small force of humans faced an army that stretched beyond the horizon. This engagement occurred during their classical antiquity period, Vexithara explained, her voice carrying a weight that made several ambassadors lean forward. Approximately 2,500 of their solar cycles ago. The tactical situation was mathematically impossible. The footage showed roughly 300 human warriors, equipped with Bronze Age weapons and primitive armor, standing in formation as thousands upon thousands of enemy soldiers approached. The odds were so overwhelming that most species would have considered resistance not just futile but actively insane. By our calculations, transmitted the Nexus minds, probability of survival, 0.0001%. Logical course of action, immediate withdrawal or surrender. The human commander was offered terms, Vexithara continued. Surrender their weapons, acknowledge the invader's supremacy, and be granted safe passage. A reasonable offer that any rational species would accept. The display zoomed in on a human warrior, clearly the leader as he received the enemy's message. His response was recorded by their primitive writing system, later translated by the Council's linguistic specialists. His exact words, Vexithara announced, were, "Come and take them." A ripple of unease passed through the chamber. Even species known for their warrior cultures found themselves shifting uncomfortably. The battle footage that followed was unlike anything in the galactic archives. The humans didn't simply fight. They fought with a methodical, terrifying efficiency that maximized enemy casualties while accepting their own death as inevitable. They used the terrain, their formation, and their weapons with a precision that spoke of not just training, but cultural preparation for exactly this type of scenario. They held the pass for 3 of their days, Vexithara narrated as the images played. During that time, they eliminated nearly 20,000 enemy soldiers. When finally overwhelmed, the surviving humans continued fighting with broken weapons, then, with their bare hands. Ambassador Zektar's mandibles had stopped clicking. His warrior's eye recognized what he was seeing, and it disturbed him in ways he couldn't articulate. They knew they couldn't win. From the beginning, they knew. Yes, Vexithara confirmed. Analysis of their pre-battle communications indicates full awareness of the tactical impossibility. They chose to fight anyway. But why? Asked Ambassador Silthara, her telepathic emanations now tinged with something approaching fear. What could possibly motivate such behavior? What did they hope to achieve? The Chancellor's appendages dimmed to almost black. According to their historical records, they were buying time. Those 3 days allowed their city-states to prepare defenses, to mobilize reinforcements, to coordinate a response. The 300 who died in the pass saved perhaps 100,000 who lived because of their sacrifice. Strategic delay tactics are not unknown, noted the scholarly conclave's representative, though his voice lacked its usual academic confidence. However, the ratio of sacrifice to strategic gain is unprecedented. This brings us, Vexithara said, her voice now barely above a whisper, to why Resolution 4471X must be passed without delay. The holographic display shifted to show recent footage, sharp, clear images from the Council's own monitoring systems. A human exploration vessel, one of their newer designs but still primitive by galactic standards, drifting in space with obvious damage. This vessel encountered a void leviathan 3 cycles ago, Vexithara explained. For those unfamiliar with the species, void leviathans are classified as Omega-level space predators. Adult specimens average 15 kilometers in length and possess natural plasma projection capabilities equivalent to our heavy battle cruisers. Several ambassadors nodded grimly. Void leviathans were among the few creatures that even advanced galactic civilizations avoided when possible. Standard protocol when encountering such a creature is immediate withdrawal to maximum safe distance and notification of the nearest military installation, continued the Chancellor. The human vessel had suffered engine damage and could not achieve escape velocity. The footage showed the massive creature approaching the tiny human ship. By any reasonable standard, the humans' fate was sealed. Their vessel was barely a tenth the size of the Predator. Their weapons were primitive chemical rockets and basic energy projectors that might, at best, irritate such a creature. The humans, Vexthera said quietly, did not attempt to hide. They did not attempt to negotiate. They did not attempt surrender. The display zoomed in on the human vessel as it slowly rotated to face the approaching Leviathan. Despite their hopeless situation, the ship's weapon systems activated. Every weapon they possessed, no matter how inadequate, trained on the massive Predator. They're going to fight it, whispered Ambassador Quilneth, her bioluminescent patches flickering, in distress. That's impossible. They can't possibly believe they can win. The battle that followed defied every principle of rational behavior. The human vessel, impossibly outmatched, began systematically targeting specific points on the Leviathan's anatomy. Their weapons were too weak to cause significant damage, but they kept firing, kept maneuvering, kept fighting with a persistence that caused the massive Predator to actually begin avoiding their attacks. Analysis of the engagement reveals the humans had identified the creature's weak points through real-time observation, reported the Nexus Minds, their electronic voices carrying an undertone of confusion. They adapted their tactics continuously, maximizing damage potential despite technological limitations. The footage showed the human vessel's hull beginning to crack under the Leviathan's plasma bursts. Sections of the ship were venting atmosphere, yet their weapons continued firing. When their primary systems began failing, the humans manually operated backup systems. When those failed, they began firing handheld weapons through opened airlocks. At this point, Vexthera noted, any rational crew would have attempted to reach escape pods or negotiate surrender. Instead, the humans did something that caused several ambassadors to physically recoil from their viewing displays. They rammed their damaged vessel directly into the Leviathan's primary nerve cluster. The explosion that followed vaporized both the human ship and a significant portion of the space Predator. The Leviathan, mortally wounded, died within moments. There were no human survivors. They killed it, Ambassador Drakthul breathed, his death cult sensibilities appreciating what others found horrifying. Impossible odds, primitive weapons, certain death, and they killed it. The chamber fell silent. The implications of what they had witnessed were slowly sinking in. Chancellor Vexthera allowed the silence to stretch before continuing. This is not an isolated incident. Our monitoring networks have recorded 47 similar engagements over the past 12 cycles. In each case, humans faced impossible odds. In each case, they chose to fight rather than surrender. In 31 of those cases, they achieved tactical objectives despite total casualties. The holographic display began cycling through brief clips from various encounters. Humans fighting space pirates with obsolete weapons. Human colonies defending themselves against natural disasters through methods that bordered on insane. Human rescue teams venturing into situations that should have killed them to save others of their species. The pattern is consistent across all recorded interactions, Vexthera continued. Humans do not simply fight when cornered, they fight, as if the concept of impossible odds is merely a tactical consideration to be overcome through superior violence and determination. Ambassador Yelthari's trading sensibilities were struggling with the implications. But surely they must understand cost-benefit analysis. Surely they realize that some fights cannot be won. Our xenopsychology teams have analyzed thousands of hours of human communications, Vexthera replied. The concept of unwinnable appears to exist in their language, but not in their behavior. When faced with certain defeat, they consistently choose to maximize enemy casualties rather than preserve their own lives. The Pacifist Alliance's representative was visibly distressed. This is pathological behavior. They should be offered psychiatric assistance, not banned from galactic society. We tried, Vexthera said grimly. First contact protocols were initiated with one of their outer colonies. Ambassador Kethal of the Diplomatic Corps attempted to establish standard peaceful relations. A new image appeared. A human settlement, on a barren world, barely more than prefabricated shelters around a mining operation. It was the kind of struggling colony that typically welcomed galactic contact as a chance for improved technology and trade opportunities. Ambassador Kethal's vessel approached with all standard peaceful signals active. Vexithera continued. Universal translators, diplomatic immunity beacons, friendship protocols engaged. The humans opened fire immediately. The footage showed primitive human missiles and energy weapons impacting against the diplomatic vessel's shields. The attacks were pathetically inadequate, like insects attacking a mountain, but they were immediate and sustained. Ambassador Kethal attempted to communicate, Vexithera explained as the display showed the sleek diplomatic vessel maintaining position despite the bombardment. He broadcast on all frequencies, transmitted mathematical proofs of peaceful intent, even attempted telepathic contact through our psionic dominion interpreters. And their response? Asked Ambassador Silthara, though her telepathic emanations suggested she already suspected the answer. They began launching nuclear weapons. The chamber erupted in shocked sounds from dozens of species. Nuclear weapons were considered primitive, dangerous, and generally abandoned by civilizations once they developed reliable fusion power. Most species viewed them as crude tools suitable only for asteroid mining or the most desperate wartime situations. The humans had launched them at a diplomatic vessel without any attempt at communication. The nuclear devices were insufficient to penetrate our shielding, Vexthara continued. But the humans continued launching them. When their orbital platforms were exhausted, they began firing them from surface installations. When those were depleted, they started loading nuclear warheads onto their mining ships and attempting ramming attacks. The footage showed exactly that. Human industrial vessels never designed for combat, accelerating on suicide runs toward the diplomatic ship. Their crews had to know they couldn't possibly succeed. But they kept coming anyway. Ambassador Kethal was forced to withdraw. After 17 of their hours, Vexthara concluded. His final report noted that the humans never attempted communication, never requested terms, never showed any behavior consistent with rational first contact protocols. They simply fought. Dr. Menthari of the Scholarly Conclave, the galaxy's leading expert in xenopsychology, rose from her position. Her species' natural calm was visibly strained as she addressed the assembly. Honored delegates, she began, her usually confident voice carrying undertones of professional bewilderment. Our analysis teams have spent considerable time studying human behavior patterns. Our findings are unprecedented. The holographic display shifted to show complex psychological modeling charts, brain scans, and behavioral analysis patterns. Most sapient species develop conflict resolution strategies based on survival probability calculations, Dr. Menthari explained. When faced with superior force, rational beings will attempt negotiation, withdrawal, or surrender to preserve life and resources for future opportunities. The charts showed standard behavioral curves for dozens of known species, all following predictable patterns of escalation and de-escalation based on tactical assessments. Humans appear to possess a fundamental psychological architecture that processes conflict differently, Dr. Menthari continued. When confronted with superior force, their neurochemistry actually increases aggression rather than triggering survival preservation responses. A new chart appeared, showing human brain scans during various conflict scenarios. The patterns were unlike anything in the galactic xenopsychological database. They possess what can only be termed a berserker state, Dr. Menthari explained, her professional detachment barely masking her obvious unease. When faced with what they perceive as existential threats, humans experience a neurochemical cascade that suppresses fear, pain sensitivity, and self-preservation instincts while simultaneously enhancing aggression, tactical thinking, and physical performance. Ambassador Zektar leaned forward, his warrior instincts recognizing something significant. You're describing a battle state not unlike our own combat conditioning. However, our warriors require years of training and biochemical enhancement to achieve such states. That's precisely the concern, Dr. Minthari replied. This appears to be a natural evolutionary trait in humans. They don't require training or enhancement to enter these states. They occur automatically when specific psychological triggers are activated. What kind of triggers? Asked Ambassador Silthera, her telepathic emanations carrying genuine apprehension. Threats to what they consider their people. Invasion of what they define as their territory. Challenges to what they perceive as their values or beliefs. The concerning factor is that humans have demonstrated the ability to extend these psychological categories to include individuals and concepts they have never directly encountered. The display showed human historical records, humans fighting and dying for abstract concepts like freedom and democracy, humans sacrificing themselves for people they had never met, humans launching into berserker states when defending others who weren't even of their own genetic lineage. They will enter these combat states, Dr. Minthari continued, to defend beings they consider innocent, to protect ideas they consider right, or to oppose what they classify as evil, regardless of the personal cost or probability of success. The chamber was growing quieter as the implications began to sink in. Furthermore, Dr. Minthari added, humans appear to be capable of what we term sacrificial escalation. When normal tactics prove insufficient, they will deliberately sacrifice their own lives to achieve tactical objectives, but they do so in ways designed to maximize psychological impact on their enemies. Chancellor Vexithara resumed control of the presentation. Dr. Minthari's analysis brings us to perhaps the most disturbing aspect of human behavior, their approach to warfare itself. The holographic display shifted to show various human historical conflicts, but this time focused on tactics and psychological warfare elements that had previously been overlooked. Most galactic civilizations conduct warfare according to rational principles, Vexithara explained. Territory acquisition, resource control, political dominance. Conflicts have clear objectives and acceptable parameters. Victory is achieved when the enemy's cost-benefit analysis favors surrender. The images showed typical galactic conflicts, clean, efficient, with clear protocols for surrender, prisoner treatment, and post-conflict integration. Human warfare operates on different principles entirely, Vexithara continued, and her appendages were now pulsing with the deep alarm coloration her species displayed when discussing existential threats. They appear to conduct what can only be termed total psychological warfare. The display showed human conflicts where captured territory was systematically destroyed rather than occupied, where retreating forces implemented scorched earth policies that denied resources to victors, and where civilian populations actively resisted occupation through methods that guaranteed massive retaliation. They don't fight to win territory or resources, Vexithara explained. They fight to make the cost of victory so psychologically traumatic that enemies will choose to withdraw rather than continue the conflict. A specific example appeared: human resistance fighters who had rigged their own population centers with explosives, detonating them when enemy forces moved in for occupation. The tactical result was the denial of the territory to the enemy, but at the cost of the humans' own civilian population. Observe their resistance patterns, Vexithara continued. When faced with occupation, humans don't simply fight. They conduct sustained campaigns designed to make the occupying force question the value of victory. They attack supply lines, assassinate collaborators, and target the enemy's morale through methods that guarantee escalating retaliation against human civilians. Ambassador Quilneth was visibly distressed. They deliberately provoke attacks against their own non-combatants? It appears, Vexithara replied grimly, that humans consider civilian casualties acceptable if those casualties serve to strengthen resistance movements and weaken enemy resolve. They seem to operate on the principle that any cost is acceptable if it ultimately leads to enemy withdrawal. The most disturbing footage yet appeared: human resistance fighters, knowing they faced certain capture and execution, detonating explosives that killed themselves along with enemy soldiers. But these weren't desperate last stands. These were coordinated tactics designed to create maximum psychological impact. They call them suicide attacks, Vexithara explained, but analysis indicates these are carefully planned psychological warfare operations. The humans conducting these attacks are not desperate or irrational. They are trained, disciplined soldiers implementing doctrine. Doctrine? Ambassador Zektar's voice carried the first notes of genuine concern the warrior species had displayed. You mean this is planned? Systematic? Their military academies teach courses in what they term asymmetric warfare, Dr. Menthari interjected, returning to her position. Humans study methods for defeating superior forces through tactics specifically designed to exploit the psychological weaknesses of rational opponents. The display showed human military textbooks translated into galactic standard, chapter titles that made several ambassadors physically recoil. Making victory too costly to achieve. Psychological warfare against superior forces. The strategic use of martyrdom. They have weaponized their own death, Dr. Menthari continued. Humans have developed tactical and strategic doctrines that treat individual human lives as expendable resources to be used for maximum psychological impact against enemies. Chancellor Vexithara's appendages were now pulsing in the rapid pattern that indicated extreme urgency among her species. Distinguished delegates, everything we have discussed so far assumes human behavior at their current technological level. Our projections for their advancement are troubling. The holographic display shifted to show comparative technological development charts. Human advancement curves appeared alongside those of various galactic civilizations during their pre-contact periods. Humans have achieved their current level of development while engaged in continuous warfare, Vexithara explained. Unlike most species who develop advanced technology during peaceful periods, human innovation appears to be directly accelerated by conflict. The charts showed the disturbing pattern. Every major human technological breakthrough had occurred during or immediately after periods of intense warfare: nuclear power, space travel, advanced metallurgy, cybernetics, all developed as weapons technologies first, then adapted for peaceful purposes. At their current rate of advancement, transmitted the Nexus minds, humans will achieve galactic standard technology within 150 of their solar cycles. However, this projection assumes continued conflict-driven development. The concerning factor, Vexithara continued, is that humans appear to have already identified the primary weakness in galactic civilization: our reliance on rational cost-benefit analysis. A new display showed intercepted human communications from their primitive internet networks. Discussion forums, academic papers, and military theoretical documents that had been translated by the Council's linguistic AI systems. Human military theorists have developed what they term xenocide doctrine, Vexithara announced, and the temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. Theoretical frameworks for conducting warfare against technologically superior, alien species. The translated documents appeared on the display, and their contents sent shockwaves through the assembly. Humans had theorized about galactic contact scenarios and developed strategic responses that assumed hostile intent from any technologically superior species. Their primary strategic assumption, Dr. Menthari explained, is that any species capable of interstellar travel would view humans as either a resource to be exploited or a threat to be eliminated. Their response doctrines are based on making human civilization too costly to destroy or control. The documents outlined strategies that made the previous footage look restrained. Global distribution of weapons of mass destruction, pre-positioned, demolition charges in all major population centers, and something they called mutually assured species destruction. They have calculated, Vexithara continued, that if faced with extinction, humans would implement what they term final protocols. Rather than accept defeat, they would destroy their own world in ways specifically designed to deny it to conquerors and create maximum psychological trauma for survivor guilt among enemy populations. Ambassador Yelthari was struggling to process the implications. They would destroy their own planet rather than surrender it. The documents indicate extensive preparation for exactly that scenario, confirmed Dr. Menthari. Human governments have apparently pre-positioned sufficient nuclear weapons to render their world uninhabitable for thousands of cycles. Their stated doctrine is that if humanity cannot survive, then no other species will be permitted to benefit from human extinction. But, Ambassador Silthera protested, her telepathic emanations now radiating genuine fear. That's completely irrational. What possible benefit could they derive from mutual annihilation? The answer appeared on the display in the form of translated human philosophical and military documents. The concept that made every rational species in the chamber recoil in horror. Humans call it spite, Vexthera explained. The deliberate choice to accept personal destruction in order to deny benefits to perceived enemies. They have elevated spite to the level of strategic doctrine. The chamber had grown unnaturally quiet. Even species that communicated through constant background chatter had fallen silent as the implications of human psychology became clear. This brings us, Chancellor Vexthera announced, to the final piece of evidence that convinced the Security Council to propose Resolution 4471X. The holographic display shifted to show recent footage from the galaxy's rim territories. A small, human exploration vessel, one of their newer designs but still primitive by galactic standards, had encountered something that made even hardened galactic military commanders nervous. 3 cycles ago, this human vessel detected a Harbinger probe in the Kepler 442 system, Vexthera explained, and several ambassadors visibly recoiled at the mention of the name. The Harbingers were the galaxy's nightmare scenario, an ancient species of aggressive expansionists who consumed entire civilizations before moving on to the next target. Harbinger probes were sent ahead of their invasion fleets to assess target worlds and civilizations. Standard protocol when encountering Harbinger technology is immediate withdrawal and alert transmission to all galactic authorities, Vexthera continued. Harbinger probes are equipped with defensive systems equivalent to our heavy cruisers, and they transmit detailed intelligence about encountered species back to the Harbinger fleet. The footage showed the human vessel detecting the probe, a massive, ominous construct that dwarfed their ship and outgunned them by orders of magnitude. Any rational species would have immediately begun emergency withdrawal procedures. The humans opened fire. Initial engagement analysis indicated typical human behavior, Dr. Menthari noted. Immediate aggression despite impossible odds, systematic targeting of what they perceived as weak points, adaptation of tactics in real-time combat. The battle footage showed the human vessel conducting hit-and-run attacks against the probe, using their inferior speed and weapons in ways that actually began to cause cumulative damage to the vastly superior Harbinger construct. However, Vexthera continued, what happened next convinced our analysts that humans represent an unprecedented threat to galactic stability. The probe, following standard Harbinger protocols, attempted to disengage and transmit its intelligence about human capabilities back to the main fleet. The humans, rather than allowing their enemy to withdraw, made a choice that defied every principle of rational warfare. They began pursuit. The human vessel followed the probe for 17 days, Vexthera explained, as the display showed the running battle across multiple star systems. Their ships suffered massive damage, their crew endured life-threatening conditions, and their fuel reserves dropped to critically low levels. Any rational commander would have broken off pursuit to preserve ship and crew. Instead, the humans had modified their own vessel during the chase, stripping non-essential systems and converting them into additional weapons. They had turned their exploration ship into a dedicated warship, accepting that they might not have enough fuel to return home. On the 17th day, Vexthera continued, the human vessel achieved a critical hit on the probe's transmission array. Rather than accepting this tactical victory and withdrawing, they continued pursuit until they had completely destroyed the Harbinger construct. The final footage showed the human ship, barely functional and leaking atmosphere, delivering a devastating final attack that vaporized the probe entirely. The humans had won an impossible victory, but at tremendous cost. Analysis of the engagement indicates the human crew knew they were likely condemning themselves to death in deep space, Dr. Menthari added. Their fuel reserves were insufficient. For a return journey, their life support was failing and their ship was structurally compromised. Did they survive? Asked Ambassador Quilneth. her pacifist nature hoping for some positive outcome. The vessel was recovered 6 months later by a human search and rescue operation, Vexithara replied. The crew had survived by cannibalizing every non-essential system, rationing supplies beyond normal survival limits, and implementing repairs that should have been impossible with their available resources. They lived, Ambassador Drakthul observed with something approaching admiration. Impossible odds, inadequate resources, certain death, and they lived. Yes, Vexithara agreed grimly. But that's not the concerning part. The holographic display shifted to show the aftermath of the human victory over the Harbinger probe. Rather than the celebration that might be expected from such an impossible victory, the footage showed something far more disturbing. Upon recovery, Vexithara explained, the human crew submitted a detailed combat report to their military authorities. But they didn't treat their victory as a fortunate survival against overwhelming odds. They treated it as intelligence gathering. The translated human military documents appeared on the display, and their contents sent a chill through the chamber that no environmental control system could dispel. The human crew analyzed every aspect of Harbinger technology they had encountered, Vexithara continued, her appendages now cycling through distress patterns. They documented tactical weaknesses, recorded response times, and identified exploitable design flaws. But more than that, they began developing countermeasures. The documents showed detailed technical analyses that demonstrated a disturbing level of human adaptability. Within weeks of their encounter, human military researchers had begun developing weapons specifically designed to exploit Harbinger weaknesses. They reverse-engineered Harbinger defensive algorithms from 17 days of combat data, Dr. Menthari explained, her professional composure finally cracking. Humans took technology that our finest scientists have studied for centuries and found ways to defeat it, using nothing but battlefield observations and crude tactical analysis. Impressive, admitted Ambassador Zektar, though his warrior's appreciation was tempered by growing unease. However, surely one encounter doesn't constitute a strategic threat assessment. The humans, Vexithara replied, didn't stop at defensive analysis. They began war planning. The next series of documents that appeared made even the death cult representatives shift uncomfortably. Human military planners had extrapolated from their single encounter to develop comprehensive strategies for fighting an enemy they had never seen, using technology they barely understood, across vast distances of space they could barely traverse. They assumed the Harbingers would return in force, Vexithara explained. Rather than developing defensive strategies or evacuation protocols, they began planning offensive operations. The strategic documents outlined human plans for preemptive strikes against Harbinger installations, using modified versions of their own primitive technology, enhanced with principles derived from 17 days of combat observation. The audacity of planning interstellar military campaigns with technology barely capable of reaching their nearest star system would have been laughable, if not for one terrifying factor. Their tactical projections, transmitted the Nexus mines, show a 23.7% probability of success. The chamber erupted in shocked silence, a nearly 25% chance of victory for a species that couldn't even achieve faster-than-light travel, planning to attack an enemy that had conquered half the galaxy. How is that possible? Demanded Ambassador Yelthari. Dr. Menthari activated a new display showing human strategic modeling. Human military doctrine incorporates variables that our strategic computers don't recognize as relevant factors: psychological warfare, acceptable loss ratios, and what they term strategic insanity. The analysis broke down human tactical assumptions: that enemy forces would be demoralized by encountering an opponent willing to accept 90% casualties to achieve objectives, that superior technology could be countered by superior desperation, and that any species advanced enough for interstellar warfare would be psychologically unprepared for opponents who treated mutual annihilation as an acceptable outcome. They're planning to win through sheer bloody-minded refusal to lose, Ambassador Zektar realized, his own warrior culture finally recognizing the true nature of human psychology. They're going to make victory so costly that the enemy chooses Defeat rather than continue paying the price. Precisely, Vexithera confirmed. And their modeling suggests it would work. Chancellor Vexithara allowed the implications to settle before continuing with the final phase of her presentation. Distinguished delegates, everything we have discussed represents human behavior at their current technological and organizational level. However, our projections for human development under galactic contact are apocalyptic. The holographic display shifted to show various scenarios modeled by the Council's finest strategic computers. Each simulation began with peaceful first contact and ended with outcomes that made hardened military strategists request immediate memory wipes. Scenario Alpha. Standard peaceful contact protocols, Vexithara announced. Humans are introduced to galactic civilization through normal diplomatic channels. They are offered standard technology sharing agreements, trade relationships, and cultural exchange programs. The simulation played out over accelerated timescales. Humans eagerly accepted galactic technology, integrated rapidly into interstellar society, and seemed to adapt well to broader cosmic civilization. For several simulated decades, the scenario appeared to progress normally. Then the variables began to shift. Within 50 cycles, Dr. Menthari explained, human colonies begin exhibiting anomalous behavior patterns. They continue to organize along military hierarchies despite peaceful conditions. They conduct training exercises that are indistinguishable from warfare preparation. Most concerning, they begin what they term contingency planning. The simulation showed human settlements throughout galactic space, all following the same pattern: rapid technological adoption, efficient integration with galactic infrastructure, and systematic preparation for large-scale conflict. The humans don't plan for peace, Vexithera continued. Even when offered everything they could want, technology, resources, knowledge, they plan for war. Their baseline assumption is that peaceful coexistence is temporary. Perhaps they're simply cautious, suggested Ambassador Quilneth hopefully. Many species maintain defensive capabilities during peacetime. Scenario Beta, Vexithara announced grimly. Humans achieve full integration into galactic civilization and encounter their first major interspecies conflict. The new simulation showed a human colony caught in a border dispute between two established galactic powers. Standard diplomatic protocols called for neutral arbitration, with the disputed territory either divided or awarded to one side with appropriate compensation to the other. The humans chose a third option. They declared war on both sides. Human strategic doctrine, Dr. Menthari explained, does not recognize the concept of acceptable losses imposed by external parties. When faced with demands they consider unreasonable, they choose escalation over compromise. The simulated conflict that followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Rather than fighting to achieve specific territorial or resource objectives, the humans fought to establish what they called deterrence precedents. They deliberately chose conflicts they couldn't win, Vexithara explained, in order to establish a reputation for imposing unacceptable costs on anyone who threatened human interests. They were willing to lose colonies if doing so would make other species hesitate before making future demands. The simulation showed human forces conducting systematic scorched earth operations on their own colonies, denying resources to both claimant species while simultaneously launching retaliatory strikes that had no strategic value beyond psychological warfare. Both opposing species eventually withdrew their claims rather than continue the conflict, Dr. Menthari noted. Not because the humans had defeated them militarily, but because the costs of victory had become unacceptable. Strategic insanity, Ambassador Zektar muttered. They're planning to be too crazy to fight. The concerning factor, Vexithara continued, is that it works. Within the simulation, other species began avoiding conflicts with human settlements, not from respect or fear of human military capabilities, but from recognition that humans would impose costs far beyond any reasonable benefit. The holographic display shifted to show the long-term implications of human integration into galactic society. What had begun as simple first contact scenarios had evolved into something that made the Council's finest strategic minds request immediate retirement. Scenario Gamma, Vexthara announced, examines the consequences of sustained human presence in galactic civilization over multiple centuries. The simulation fast-forwarded through decades of human integration, showing the gradual but inexorable changes their presence introduced to galactic society. At first, the changes appeared minor. Slightly modified trade protocols, adjusted military doctrines, new approaches to conflict resolution that accounted for human factors. But the changes compounded. Within 200 cycles, Dr. Menthari explained, galactic military doctrine begins incorporating human tactical principles. Other species start adopting acceptable loss ratios similar to human norms. Conflict resolution increasingly favors parties willing to accept higher casualties. The simulation showed a galactic civilization gradually transforming from its traditional emphasis on rational cost-benefit analysis to something resembling the human approach to conflict. Species that had maintained peace for millennia began engaging in increasingly destructive wars as they adopted human strategic thinking. The humans didn't conquer galactic civilization, Vexthara explained. They infected it with their own psychological approach to conflict. Within 300 cycles, the simulation shows galactic warfare becoming indistinguishable from human warfare. Total, brutal, and focused on psychological destruction rather than strategic objectives. Ambassador Silthara's telepathic emanations were now radiating pure horror. They're contagious? Their madness spreads? Human strategic thinking appears to be evolutionarily advantageous in competitive environments, Dr. Menthari confirmed. Species that adopt human-like approaches to conflict consistently outperform those that maintain traditional rational doctrines. The result is selective pressure favoring increasingly human-like psychology across all galactic civilizations. The simulation's final projections were apocalyptic. By the 500 cycle mark, galactic civilization had devolved into a state of permanent warfare, with multiple species employing human-derived tactics of mutual annihilation and spite-based strategy. The galaxy's population had declined by 78%. Technological advancement had stagnated due to constant warfare, and most habitable worlds had been rendered uninhabitable through deliberate, scorched earth policies. The humans don't need to conquer us, Vexthara concluded. Their mere presence in galactic society initiates a cascade failure that transforms peaceful civilization into something resembling their own perpetual warfare culture. But surely, Ambassador Quilneth protested desperately, this is just theoretical modeling. Surely actual humans wouldn't behave so destructively if offered genuine peaceful coexistence. Vexthara's appendages dimmed to their darkest possible coloration. Scenario Delta. Humans are offered complete autonomy within galactic space, no territorial demands, no resource obligations, no cultural interference. They are given advanced technology freely, and asked only to maintain peaceful relations with their neighbors. The simulation that followed was the most disturbing yet. Humans accepted the generous terms, established themselves throughout galactic space, and for nearly a century appeared to be model galactic citizens. Then they encountered their first existential threat. A natural disaster, stellar collapse, threatening a human world, Dr. Menthari explained. Standard galactic emergency protocols were implemented. Evacuation ships were dispatched, alternative colonies were prepared, and compensation was arranged for lost infrastructure. The humans rejected all offers of assistance and chose instead to attempt to prevent the stellar collapse using techniques that had a 0.3% chance of success and a 47% chance of rendering the entire system uninhabitable. They succeeded, Vexthara noted grimly, at the cost of destabilizing 3 neighboring systems and creating a navigational hazard that will persist for millennia. When questioned about their decision to risk catastrophic collateral damage for minimal probability of success, their response was, a translated human communication appeared on the display. We don't negotiate with physics. The chamber fell into stunned silence. Chancellor Vexthara surveyed the assembly, noting the shifted postures, dimmed coloration, and electromagnetic emanations that indicated deep disturbance across dozens of different species. The evidence had achieved its purpose. No rational being could deny the threat that humanity represented to galactic civilization. Distinguished delegates, she announced, the Security Council's recommendation is clear. Resolution 4471X must be implemented immediately. Humanity must be quarantined to their home system until such time as they develop psychological profiles compatible with galactic civilization. Ambassador Zektar rose slowly, his massive frame seeming somehow diminished by what he had witnessed. Chancellor, my people have built our reputation on martial prowess. We take pride in our warrior traditions. But what we have seen today— He paused, struggling with concepts that challenged everything his species believed about conflict. This is not warfare. This is madness weaponized. The warrior caste hegemony votes in favor of Resolution 4471X. 1. By one, the ambassadors began to declare their positions. The pacifist alliance, traumatized by the implications of human psychology, voted for quarantine. The Trade Federation, recognizing that human approaches to conflict would destabilize all economic relationships, supported the resolution. Even the death cult sect, despite their philosophical appreciation for human attitudes toward mortality, acknowledged that uncontrolled human expansion would ultimately destroy the galaxy they sought to inherit. The vote was not close. Of the 1,247 member species present, 1,241 voted in favor of Resolution 4471X. 5 abstained. Only 1 voted against Ambassador Krindath of the Survivor Coalition, a small alliance of species that had endured multiple extinction events, stood to address the assembly. Honored colleagues, she began, my people have faced annihilation 17 times in our recorded history. We have survived asteroid impacts, stellar events, plague, invasion, and the collapse of our home system. We understand existential threats better than perhaps any other species in this galaxy. She paused, her scarred carapace reflecting the chamber's lights as she considered her words carefully. What you have shown us today terrifies you, because you have never faced true extinction. You see human behavior as insane because you cannot imagine circumstances where such behavior becomes rational. But my people remember what it means to face the absolute end of everything we are, everything we could ever be. Her voice carried across the chamber with the weight of species memory, of survival against impossible odds. In those moments when existence itself hangs in the balance, the psychology you call madness becomes the only sane response. Humans have not lost their minds. They have simply never forgotten that existence is not guaranteed, that peace is not permanent, and that sometimes the only choice is between fighting impossible odds and accepting certain extinction. The chamber was completely silent now. Even the constant background communications ceased. You want to quarantine them because they frighten you. But perhaps what frightens you is not their insanity, but their sanity. Perhaps what disturbs you is not that they are mad, but that they are preparing for possibilities you dare not consider. Ambassador Krindath settled back into her position. The Survivor Coalition votes against Resolution 4471X. If humanity ever faces extinction, we want them as allies, not prisoners. Despite the lone dissent, Resolution 4471X passed with overwhelming support. The implementation orders were signed immediately, with deployment scheduled to begin within the cycle. Chancellor Vexathera remained in the chamber as the various delegations departed, many still discussing the disturbing implications of what they had witnessed. The holographic displays had been deactivated, but the translated human documents remained in the archives, available for any species that wanted to study the most dangerous psychology the galaxy had ever encountered. Ambassador Krindath approached the Chancellor as the chamber emptied. You know they'll eventually break quarantine, the Survivor Coalition representative observed quietly. The containment systems are designed to last millennia, Vexathera replied. Long enough for human psychology to evolve beyond its current parameters. Evolution doesn't work that way, Krindath said with the patience of a species that had survived multiple extinction events. Traits that ensure survival don't disappear because they're inconvenient. They become more pronounced. Vexithara's appendages flickered uncertainly. Are you suggesting the quarantine will fail? I'm suggesting that when it fails, and it will fail, the humans who break out will be the ones who best embody everything that terrifies you about their species, the ones who refuse to accept containment, the ones who see your quarantine as proof that peaceful coexistence was never possible. The Chancellor considered this implication, her coloration shifting through patterns of deep concern. By the time they achieve interstellar capability, Crindath continued, they'll have spent generations preparing for exactly the kind of conflict your quarantine represents. They'll have had centuries to develop countermeasures for galactic technology, strategies for fighting superior forces, and psychological frameworks that treat your entire civilization as an existential threat to their species. What would you have us do? Vexithara asked. Allow them to spread their madness throughout the galaxy. I would have you remember that survival is not madness, Crindath replied, and that species who forget how to fight for their existence rarely survive contact with species who remember. The Survivor Coalition ambassador departed, leaving Chancellor Vexithara alone with the weight of a decision that would reshape galactic civilization, and with the growing suspicion that they might have just made the worst possible choice. In the depths of space, automated monitoring stations began moving into position around the Sol system. Quantum barriers designed to contain any species for millennia started powering up. Warning beacons that would last longer than most civilizations began broadcasting their messages of quarantine, and on the third planet from a yellow star, humanity continued their preparations for a universe that had already decided they were too dangerous to be allowed freedom. The galaxy had voted for safety. It remained to be seen whether safety and survival were the same thing. It has been one full cycle since the implementation of Resolution 4471X. The quarantine holds. Human attempts to breach the containment have been persistent but unsuccessful. Our monitoring stations report 2,847 separate breach attempts, ranging from crude chemical rockets to surprisingly sophisticated attempts at quantum tunneling. Dr. Menthari's latest report indicates that human psychological profiles are not moderating as hoped. If anything, the quarantine appears to be intensifying the behavioral traits we sought to contain. Human society is reorganizing around the assumption that they face an existential threat from galactic civilization. They are preparing for war. Not the limited conflicts we observed in their historical records, but total species warfare against a technologically superior enemy. Every human installation now doubles as a military facility. Every human citizen receives combat training. Their entire civilization is transforming into what can only be described as a weapon aimed at the galaxy that imprisoned them. Ambassador, Crindath visits my office regularly. She never says, "I told you so," but her presence serves as a constant reminder that survival and safety are not synonymous. The other council members sleep peacefully, confident that their children will inherit a galaxy safe from human madness. I find myself wondering if those children will inherit a galaxy at all. The monitoring stations continue to report breach attempts. Each failure teaches them more about our containment systems. Each adaptation brings them closer to success. I have begun to suspect that Resolution 4471X will be remembered as the moment galactic civilization chose its own destruction, not through malice or conquest, but through the simple act of teaching humanity that peaceful coexistence was never possible. When they break free, and I no longer doubt that they will emerge as something far more dangerous than the species we feared. They will emerge as a species that spent centuries preparing for the war we declared the moment we voted to imprison them. Perhaps Ambassador Crindath was right. Perhaps we should have welcomed them as allies while such a choice was still possible. But it is too late now. The cage is built, and the predator is learning its dimensions. All that remains is to see who proves stronger, the galaxy's faith in rational containment, or humanity's refusal to accept the impossible.